Desi looked around from her seat in the second row. Mel was on her left, with Vadim on the other side. Then Belder and Liam just passed them, letting the boys feel secure. On her right, the twins were chatting, while Lark fiddled with her Omnicam next to Bree. The others were farther down. She slid down in her seat a bit, trying not to grin. She was just behind the head administrator, her husband and her co-wife, which meant the three women past them were going to become her grandmothers. "Are you ready?" Mel leaned in. "I mean, after this, it's all legal." "I know!" Desi watched the stage when Mavere caught her eye and winked. "As soon as they marry, they're my mother and father." "And I know it looks a bit showy, but Jama assured me this will be dignified." Professor Bergres wore a satisfied smile as she leaned in next to the head administrator, who was sitting just in front of Desi with her husband and co-wife. Apparently. "I'm certain that everything will be fine, Tanada." Administrator Sasano gave her a firm nod. "After all, this is for the groom and brides." "You can put that down, you know." Off to Desi's right, Gumbri was whispering to Lark. "Please, tell me you won't be a nervous wreck fiddling with your cameras when the right guy comes our way." "Isn't it exciting?" Belder whispered hoarsely to Liam, holding onto his hand and giving it a quick shake in her excitement. "I'm so glad that you could come. I mean, you know what a traditional human wedding is like, but still." "I guess." Liam was craning around to look at the huge amphitheatre, and he whispered back to Belle, "Usually it's just friends and family." The whole hall was filled by the sound of the waves and the susurrus of countless whispered conversations. Outside, the sun had set, but lights had been turned on up above, playing over the rock crystals in the ceiling, and illuminating the cavern in a beautiful wash of lavender, like the last rays of twilight. Up on stage, her mothers, they were going to be her mothers, were radiant. The pair looked easy with the crowd and with each other, leaning in to whisper to each other as they glanced expectantly toward the doors. "Gentlemen and ladies, quiet please. The groom has entered the theatre." Desi grinned at the announcement. Down in the control booth, Nespa's voice seemed to come from every direction, and she glanced over at Mel. "Goddess, the acoustics in this place." The crowd settled, though, leaving only the sound of the ocean rushing in over the breakers and past the air curtain to wash around the stage and orchestra pit, just beneath the alcove for the cliff singer. The twins are right. Arky would probably love performing here. She'd never hoped for more than getting through entrance exams and accepting the nightmare of a life she'd refused, remaking herself into the someone she wasn't, but could be. She'd made it in, and faced the prospect of going through all 4 years undetected. The girls here were her friends, though, and now she was going to have a real family. Goddess! She was sitting here chatting to her best friend, an imperial princess. What a long, strange voyage it's been. She glanced back up on the stage. The brides had straightened up now, taking hold of a broom, and maybe there was a hint of nerves in their smiles. Still, they looked beautiful, dressed alike in the colours of House Pelavon. That's going to be my house now. Any further thought was cut off as the doors opened behind her, and she turned to look with the crowd. Warwick looked stunned. "Oh boy," Liam whispered, but quieted as Belden nudged him. Not that it mattered. Now the groom had appeared and everyone started talking. Some started to clap. There were more than a few whistles. Professor Jimenez leaned in to talk to Tom, almost her father, doubtless sharing some words of sage advice, man to man, then took him by the hand, starting him down the aisle, before leading him up on stage. "Dearly beloved," Jama intoned, and the crowd went silent, We are gathered here today to get through this thing called life. The elderly man looked pleased as he smiled at the crowd. An electric word, life. It means forever, and that's a bloody long time. But I'm here to tell you, there's something else. Marriage. Jama raised his hands, and the crowd erupted once again into enthusiastic cheering. What's Jama saying? The administrator's husband whispered. It's a human ceremony, she whispered back. I know that. He shook his head slightly, but I didn't understand a word of it. That accent of his. Well, he's a Cambrian, love. She patted her husband's hand sympathetically. You know his accent gets thicker when he's tired, stressed, or had a few. Tonight you can probably pick two, but he is getting on. I've known him just as long as you have, but that doesn't mean... Anything else was drowned out by the cheering, as Professor Jimenez gave a nod and they jumped over the broom. She was cheering too. This was a dream come true, one she never even dared to hope for. And now, according to human tradition, the dancers. The auditorium door slammed open and an apparition appeared at the top of the steps. Desi looked back with the crowd. The figure had a mop of yellow hair, long green ears, kind of like a rabbit, and threw its arms wide. We're here! Oh, goddess! One of the twins squeaked. The other looked stunned and nodded. It's them! Music blared. Everyone looked back from the entrance as suddenly people, men, practically swam on stage. Men of all kinds. Shulvanti, humans, Rakiri, Halcom. They were all male. They wore black pants, black ties, and white halter tops, and were all holding brooms. The spotlights covered the stage as the dancers surrounded them, strutted into a circle, struck a pose, and started to... Oh, goddess! Those are the dancers from the tide pool! The whistles in the audience grew muted, just as Professor Burgress fainted. The audience was stunned, not that she blamed them. Some of the men looked like they were actually... Some of the men looked like they were actually almost lifting their halter tops. Nay then, if anyone has anything to say, let them speak now or forever hold their peace, Jama said firmly. For you ladies in the crowd, we cannot mean time for questions and answers from the audience. Hundreds of hands shot into the air. As the reception started, Desi hid herself away in the crowd, people watching. It felt silly, but she didn't really know her own family. And they were her family now, no question about that. Still, Warwick, her father, would probably want some time with his wives. She barely knew Shalea, and hadn't actually met her new grandmothers yet. Well, not really. How to introduce herself? It seemed like the whole school had turned out for the wedding, and now most were staying for the buffet. And the eye candy. She wandered past Belder, who was hanging on tight to Liam. More than a few envious looks were getting thrown their way. Despite the dance video that had circulated around campus, most of the girls on campus still hadn't believed she'd landed a human guy, or that he'd be even taller than she was. Now, faced with the real thing? Alright, so maybe 100 scantily dressed male dancers mingling in the reception were a bit of a distraction, and there were a lot more men here than usual, even if most weren't Shulvanti. She spotted their waiter from the tire pool talking animatedly, with a throng of 30 girls, and already heard a lot of students asking for dates. The men seemed to be holding their own. If you girls only knew. Actually, that might make for more offers. Belder was still being careful, though. Even with all the men tonight, there were still plenty of thirsty looks being sent Liam's way. Given the wedding entertainment, she couldn't exactly blame them, but Shalara from the IOTC was circling around and showing off her tits every time he turned her way. Better hang on tight, Belle. And that wasn't a traditional human wedding, Liam was muttering. Belda looked at him quizzically as she slipped an arm around his waist. They are married now, aren't they? Liam paused a moment, frowning in thought. Well, yeah, that part's fine, but we don't need dancers. Okay. Belle looked a little relieved, though she was probably trying to cover. You do love dancing, though, right? Not that kind. Well, not at a wedding. And I am not taking questions from the studio audience. Of course not. Like you said, only our friends and family. Belda nodded and hugged him tight. There can't be more than 400 people on my side. What? Desi raised a glass towards Belle in an unspoken salute and drifted on. Belle was probably relieved she didn't need to hire 100 dancers. She was a traditional girl, after all. And where would you even find something like that on Willist? Well, if they were married there. Earth was a long way away. She'd expected to see Professor Jimenez talking with Alrada, the club manager. She eventually spotted him working his way over to the group, where her mothers and father were talking to a crowd of their friends. She was going to have to work up her nerve and... There you are! Mel's voice took Desi from a reverie, and she shook herself, grinning sheepishly. Goddess, you startled me. Desi felt herself blush, but took a drink, trying to cover. Vadim, his arm looped through Melondi's, gave her a smile, which didn't help. Even wall-gathering over her new family, there were a lot of cute guys. Dating hadn't even been a thought until after graduation, when she could be herself and... Desi? Patrol leader to Desi? Come in, Desi. Mel was grinning. You look 1,000 light years off. Why aren't you with your family anyway? Well... Desi felt her smile crumple. Goddess, this is going to sound stupid. I don't really know how. When she'd first arrived at the academy, she'd had to force herself to talk to anyone, scared she'd give herself away. Then she talked to everyone, trying to blend in by making friends. She'd never dreamed she'd become best friends with a princess. Mel was Kalira, but Mel was also Mel. Anyway, if she could talk to anyone... What? Desi, you're one of the most social people I know. Mel looked taken aback. Not that Desi could blame her, but still. It's just... After my mother died, my co-mothers... Well, they weren't really anything to me. I was... Look, it was bad, you know. Desi sighed. Talking to Mel was one thing, but with Vadim there? He was looking at her so sympathetically she wanted to die of embarrassment, even if it did help a bit. Anyway, it was too late to stop talking now, and she looked at him, trying to explain. Goddess, this is humiliating. My co-mothers treated me like a burden most of my life. I haven't even met my new grandmothers, and I don't want to make a bad impression. Desi saw comprehension dawn on Mel's face, but what could she say? After their secrets had come out, they'd grown even closer, shared stories about each other's lives. Everyone knew what had happened to Mel's father, but no one talked about how isolated she'd been, growing up as Kalira Tassu. That wasn't the sort of thing you heard about a princess. It's all right, I understand, Vadim said quietly, breaking the silence. It was just Dad and me after my dad and Mum divorced. It's not easy growing up feeling alone. No one else gets it. I mean, the folks in the kitchen were always like family to me, but it's not the same, is it? Your father isn't married? Despite herself, Desi balked at the news. It just seemed so odd. I mean, your father is... Well, he must have... Mel? It's all right. Vadim told me ages ago. Mel slipped her hand from Vadim's, moving it about his waist. He didn't want anyone to know. People get funny ideas about unmarried guys. I mean, Dad's had plenty of offers and he puts on a good show, but not a lot of women want to marry a guy that's gone till all hours at a restaurant. That's what happened with my mum. Vadim nodded a bit glumly, but he rallied, shaking it off. Women disappear once Dad says he won't start working. And sure, we're nobles, but we're not exactly the wealthy end of House Desari. Dad says he's just waiting for the right woman to come along, but sometimes I think he gave up and married the business. Anyway, just don't tell anyone, please. You have my word on it. Desi was nodding and gave them a smile. How to process that? Here she'd been feeling sorry for herself, but a boy growing up without mothers? It's all right, Vadim grinned. It hasn't been so bad, but look at the three of us. We're probably the only people in the room who don't have three mothers. I mean, Dad isn't always easy to get on with. And Mel. Yeah, Mel shifted, glancing around furtively. My mother doesn't run a restaurant, but I get the bad hours and not being there. I really want you to meet Lady Wickhama, though. Vadim gave Mel a happy smile. He was cute, and he'd come out of his shell so much since they'd gotten together. They seemed good for each other. It was the best advice she'd ever given, and Desi felt herself cheering up, even if she still didn't know what to do with herself. All right, my advisor. Time for me to give you some. Mel tucked an arm around Desi's shoulder and turned them both to where her family. Goddess, that was going to feel weird for a while, where her family was talking with the head administrator and her family. Vadim's father and Professor Jimenez were getting chatted up by her grandmothers. This was just too surreal. Look, we're going over, and you're coming too. I have to get back what I loaned Professor Pelavon. I know you said you were covering something old. Desi let herself get pushed along, and it did help. She'd faced an Academy of Nobles. She could handle her own family. Maybe. What was it, anyway? One of my great-great-grandmother's rings, Mel said blithely. It was a good thing she hadn't been sipping her drink, or she'd have choked. What? Mel, that should be in a... It's doing something useful, Mel said firmly. Besides, I have a couple of them, and it's not one of the gaudy ones. Anyway, what did Zen Shiki get for something borrowed? She's the Pesrin you were telling me about. Vadim canted his head at them both. Don't let Dad see her. He was happy to save Tom's life, but he's still kind of pissed about the ceiling. That's the one, Mel nodded, then looked around. Where is she, anyway? Zen Shiki should have been satisfied. The lucky cat was secure on the head table, waving its gold arm. Getting it out of the library collection had posed some challenges, especially picking the lock, but it hadn't been too bad. The case hadn't even been alarmed. She'd missed the dancing, but it gave her time to slip it onto the head table in the reception with none the wiser. As her pra-fact, Warwick would doubtless be pleased. She sniffed. There it was again! She slammed herself behind a heavy pillar of purple marble to hide. The air was filled with the confused miasma of the sense of over 2,000 people in the reception hall, but even so, she couldn't be that mistaken. Could she? She sniffed twice. It was there, under the scent of Shilvanti and Helcom, and even the rancid trace of Rakiri. Is that a boy I smell? She almost shivered, and it took a moment to calm herself. Reaching down, she took hold of her Asaiak, so she wouldn't make a spectacle of herself. There it was again! The scent trace passed over her nose, and she sniffed twice more. Yes, it was a boy smell! By the Dark Mother, what was a Pesrin boy doing here? Frost and flames, what am I going to do? There's a boy here! Her Asaiak twitched in her hand, and she had to hold on firmly. Thank the Dark Mother for the new skirts. At least she wasn't showing off her behind whenever it swayed, or getting it choked off. A male was here. The smell was not one of her warband. Her heart was beating hard, as she forced herself to stand still. I will not panic. I will not. Simply calm down and take a nice, deep... Dark goddess, she needed a mate. Whoever he was, he smelled so good. It wasn't like her grandfather. This was different. I will not mewl. I will not purr. Calm down. I smelled boys outside the family 3 whole times before. But it makes me feel so amazing. It smelled so good. She loved boy smell. From the scent of him, he was her age, and the scent was powerful. For a scent that strong, surely he'd been sweating. She knew what this was, the scent of a male Pezrin, and she was so ready. There wasn't a bandmother to keep her under control. No pathfinder to deal with someone outside the warband. Pesh was thousands of light years away. This shouldn't be happening. I'm getting tingles all over from the delicious boy scent. He's close. Dark goddess is making me boy crazy. I just want to... She shook herself. No! I am Zen Shiki Green Eyes of the Natashta. I am Karal, who will eat evil's heart. I will get a hold of myself, and am not spending the night hiding here behind the furniture. She kept herself from taking another deep breath, stared at her Asiac, then smoothed out her blazer before stepping out. His fur was as black as obsidian, save for the patch of white at his throat. Eyes as gold as the Metsky Svitkra stared into hers without blinking. So there you are. It had been quite an evening, and the fireworks were yet to come. Akame Zarin grinned at Marin, as they kept Ian and Sam safely between them. Ian was immaculately dressed, looking good enough to eat, and Sam... Come, girl. Party now, cuddle puddle later. After all, she had an image to maintain. As a tenured professor of physics, her position in the academy was secure, but it wasn't like the staff didn't talk. There were still older heads that would shake primly at such goings-on, even if they'd had to take Professor Burgress home. And aye, ladies, it's all about love and marriage, though dinna make the mistake of mixing them up together. They're 2 different things. Still, I swear by the Empress, I was made an ordained priest on Huraltal II once I was properly ordained. Jama's eyes were twinkling as he disengaged himself from the co-bride's 3 mothers. Leia, wasn't it? She seemed nice. She slipped her hand up Sam's back, teasing the base of his spine. I won't be the only one getting lucky tonight. Get ready for that human to rock your world. Still, she had to be a good hostess. The head administrator was enjoying herself with Mavere, but she wasn't oblivious either, and Sammy had made quite an entrance. Their initial disappointment that this party wasn't for them blew past in an instant, and they had so much to catch up on. At least, once she got him to push back the green hoodie with those ridiculous bunny ears. You're both going to just love it, she grinned, as Aya moved to corral Sammy back into the conversation. The new science complex will have a wonderful view over the ocean. I can't wait to show you the site. And we really get to name them too? Sammy blinked up at her under their puffball of hair. Both of them. Akame wasn't sure whose eyes she preferred. Alright, even if Sammy's eyes were so very green, she was such a sucker for Sam. Have you thought about what we're going to call them? We talked about it all the way here. Sammy nodded vigorously. Sam wants to call his the Samuel Forsyth Painter Center for Applied Science, and mine's the Sammy Painter Forsyth Center for Applied Science. Akame barked out a hearty laugh. Do you know how many lost freshwomen we're going to have? Isn't it great? Sammy grinned impishly before taking a drink. Just beside her, Sam gave a modest chuckle. Goddess, it was so good to see them again. Akame grinned merrily, and was about to give Sam a surreptitious squeeze when some of the students arrived. She'd had Deshin pointed out to her. Miv was adopting the girl. Well, now they were married, it was final too. The other girl was hanging on to a handsome young guy, and together they were keeping him safe. Ah, well. Professor now, play later. There you are. The groom grinned. She'd met Warwick a few times now, though she couldn't claim to know him well. She watched as he took Deshin by the hand, and brought her proudly over to Della, Pyles and Hegel, his new mothers-in-law. Ladies, I'd like you to meet your new granddaughter, Deshin. These are her friends, Malondi Sandoka and Budinsan, Vadim. You're Malondi, then? As the new grandmother surrounded Deshin, Sam disentangled himself to look at the taller girl. We've come a long way to meet you after we heard about some work. The Sandoka girl looked slightly flustered, but covered it quickly, with more poise than most girls her age. It didn't stop Akame from canting her head slightly as she glanced at Sam, but he shook his head. It was curious, but he'd probably tell her later. Thank you, sir. She smiled warmly, looking at Sam rather gratefully. I'm very thankful to my friend, Jaxmi Chalksa, for asking you. Sam and I have heard all about her. Sammy bounced excitedly. Where is she? Well now, that's my surprise. Akame grinned and scanned the crowd. Spotting her willing victims in the crowd, she waved them over. Jaxmi is one of my girls. Not majoring in science, but she's taking one of my courses as an elective. Anyway, while you're both here, I've asked her to be your guide, Sam. And I have people just dying to meet you, Sammy. Oh? Sammy peered up at her under their puffball of electric yellow hair. Sam's had taken on some grey, but Sammy looked the same as ever. Still just as mischievous, too. Just for you. Ah, Sam, I'd like you to meet Miss Jaxmi Chalksa. Jaxmi smiled as she stepped forward, nodding graciously as she offered a fist to Sam. While on the other hand... And Sammy, I'd like you to meet my prize students, Kamar and Casper. Alright, she still could tell them apart once they started talking, but tonight they were back to dressing identically. The girls leaned into each other, hands clasped in front of them as they stared at Sammy, and it wasn't like Sammy wasn't staring back. She nearly giggled. Okay, she'd been that starstruck by the Sams all those years ago, so it wasn't fair. But she caught the twins looking at the picture on her office wall. Besides, it was so much fun to watch. While you're here, Kamara and Casper will be at your beck and call. For me? Sammy was grinning maniacally while the twins quivered, looking ready to faint. This is for every time you two made me try and guess. The girls tilted their heads in unison. Hi. Sammy grabbed the rabbit ears flapping around their shoulders and bounced happily. Eee! Tom thought to only look bemused at the look on the twins' faces. When he first met the twins, he had flashbacks to The Shining. Now it was hard not to laugh out loud, but he managed to keep it down to a smile and cover it with a drink. Miv had smuggled out his bottle of Johnny Walker Blue for the occasion, which was nice. Most of the faculty were taking in a red grain or a blue grail, while glaring at their students if they seemed to be getting too carried away. It might have been worse, but there were boys. The opposite sex still beat an open bar. Mind you, 2 of the men here were human. Well, people. He'd had a few fast words with Sam. They'd had an awkward moment between shaking hands and bumping fists, but he seemed like an easy guy to talk with. Someone more or less his own age. Aside from Hope and Liam, they were the only humans he'd seen in ages. As for Sammy, well, them seemed like a lot of fun. Definitely half in a world of their own, but Professor Zarin seemed to know them both well. Jaxmi too. Alright, Mel had mentioned something about needing his help later, but tonight was his wedding night. Tomorrow, he had to teach an unplanned class. Later would come when it came. Of course, he did need to talk to Jama about all this. After the ceremony, the elderly shill explained a bit, but it felt like the tip of the iceberg. As surprises went, a hall full of Chippendales wasn't unwelcome. At least with that many guys in the crowd, the attention was off him, particularly with the students, but still. Definitely a story for later. I still have to find out how he dug all this up. It has to be from Zen Shiki. Where is she, anyway? And now, your ladies must excuse me. Jama set his drink down and grinned to them wickedly. It's time for the very last part, as young Tom here tosses his garter. There wasn't any point correcting him. It had been a surreal night as it was. Happy, but surreal. Rod Sterling was probably rolling in his grave. And who dug out the lucky cat? Anyway, it was too late. The elderly shill was already making for the podium. Besides, what am I going to do with a garter? He looked at Miv on his left, and Leia on his right, and gave them both a quick hug. Leia gave a quiet squeak. Ladies, you're going to have to excuse me for a minute. I think I know what this is. I won't be long.
So there you are.
Zen Shiki felt like she could fall into those eyes as they looked at her, but he didn't blink, and she made herself not blink. Dark mother! It was hard enough holding her aside from swaying. She needed to say something, introduce herself, find out his warband. He was dressed like the other males spread throughout the crowd. Incongruous black pants that fit him so well, and
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
his asaiak was generously proportioned. Yes. Be calm. Better. The male before her was dressed the same as the other males, right down to the white collar, cuffs and halter top. Even the black thing tied in a bow at his throat. There was a story here. All she had to do was open her mouth and...
Right then!
The voice boomed over the crowd, and her eyes flickered across the room where an elderly Shilvanti had taken the stage.
I need all your unmarried lads in the audience to join me up here when the groom tosses his garter. According to tradition, the lad, as catches it, is the next to be married.
The vision standing before her shrugged and turned away.
Pardon me, my oath calls. I'm Zen Shiki. Say it! Ah!
It was too late. She watched him glide away toward the stage. Not that the view wasn't worth it, but he was gone. It was precious little solace that her disappointment was echoed by the sounds of hundreds of disappointed girls, as men of all sorts disengaged from conversations, slipping up on the stage. Whispers reached her ears from all over the room as the Shilvanti girls recover their senses.
Not that I need to. He didn't smell that good. Oh, dark mother, who do I think I'm fooling?
She watched as the crowd of men took to the stage as gracefully as if it were natural. Curiously, they formed a line behind the elderly shill, who started protesting. He seemed to be laughing as much as not, but the men put him firmly between them and her Hachakt, who watched the whole thing with amusement. In the end, somehow, 100 males managed to hide behind the elderly shill. The male who had been with Melondi, as well as the floridly dressed one who looked like his relative. The human male who was with the girl named Belder. It didn't matter. Her male, no, the male, was hidden from view. She could still smell him, though. Even in the vast crowd his scent lingered, but she could not see him. Her stomach rolled, and her insides did a happy flip when she sniffed again, learning his scent. All right then. Her Hachakt craned his head to the line of hiding males, before hefting the blue thing in his hand. Guess it's down to the four of you. Here goes. Warwick tossed the garter into the air.
and the breath caught in 2,000 female throats. Captain Solani settled into her chair. Like the rest of her pod, they were watching the main screen. Filling the rest of the tiny control room, Captain Biona and Sergeant Yala were looking too. The objective was there in a crowd of thousands, but they had her in view. Anyway, the ground pods were mixing in close. Sergeant Kalani shrugged and crossed her arms. I didn't think the old guy could move that fast. Veiko shook her head ruefully. Not like the other one was much slower. What do you think it means since the two guys caught it together? I don't know, but look at that crowd. The guys are leaving. Kalani rubbed her tusk and made a face, though hers wasn't even close to the disappointed students. Goddess, the way Professor Hemeris slid in behind Liam? Goddess, he's so tall the professor disappeared. I think that was the idea, Biona snorted. Well, Mr. Dasari did the same thing behind his son's back. Kalani didn't seem ready to give up on the matter, but she nodded slowly. At least I get that. I mean, even if he's single, it's his son. And his kid's with a princess, but yeah, Yala chuckled. Anyway, I certainly wouldn't throw his dad out of bed. Teeps, I'd even make him breakfast in the morning. He's a chef, Di, Veiko rumbled with a good-natured grin. Besides, we've tasted your cooking. Didn't think you want to poison a date. Lick me, V, you can't. Anyway, Biona raised her voice. The other settled down as Biona shook the jar in her hand meaningfully. You know what we're here for. Fuck yeah, Yala grinned. Two lucky bitches get out of here to follow them on their honeymoon. Honeymoon, Biona amended, but she was nodding as Solani swiveled around in her chair. Some of the ground pods had kicked up a fuss about not being in the drawing, but it had been short-lived. Even if they were confined to campus when the objective was there, they were free to move around outside all the time. You're sure we can't just take a peek in his place tonight? Yala was wearing a lecherous grin as she toyed with the tip of a tusk. You know, captains, operational security and all that. Don't push it, Yala. That whole business about his music collection barely made Agent Avari blink when I told her, and operational security is starting to sound kind of thin. Solani shook her head, though she was tempted to peek. At this point, it's a miracle we convinced her to let two of us go. But we haven't seen him with anyone besides Miv. Solani took a deep breath and held back a sigh. Kalani didn't seem to have Yala's voyeuristic streak. But with a show like that most evenings, it was hard not to. I mean, they agree Shalea gets him tonight. 20 credits says she passes out in the first 10 minutes. Yala grinned. Come on, Captain. Just a sporting bet. No means no, Biona sighed. Even with Kalani and Veiko's obsession with games and that silly cube, she was glad to have them in her pod. There were already bets forming over Warwick's new competition, and no one even knew the rules yet. Anyway, gamer geeks or not, they were her pod. Sergeant Yala was a good trooper, but Biona's pod could get a little too salty. With a show like that on the monitors. Goddess, I seriously need to get laid. Right then, 2 names. Biona held up one hand theatrically before digging into the jar. And the first winner is...